I see we've all made our way back. All the Cape Town people with their blankets and their hot tea. I'm very excited to welcome Rev Berry Behr. As you read in my email, she's the chairperson of the Cape Town Interfaith Initiative, as well as the South African coordinator for the Charter for Compassion. And she's going to use this wonderful perspective, and we're going to explore how cultivating inner peace serves as a foundation for transformation and renewal. Berry, welcome so much with us. I'm so thrilled that you agreed to this whole experiment, and we're looking forward to hearing what you say. God bless you as you speak.
Thank you so much, and thank you once again for the invitation. I'm humbled and honored. I'm finding myself wishing that somebody else was speaking and I could just sit back and listen, because I've had such a wonderful morning with you all so far. Christine, that experience was just absolutely wonderful. Thank you. So my prayer as I come into spaces like this is always simply to listen and to be a conduit and to serve. So thank you once again for allowing me the opportunity. So I chose as my subject this morning the elements of hope and renewal, probably more out of a hope for renewal than anything else. The times that we are in have been pretty challenging for so many of us. So I'm also very aware that as we come through this time of really deep challenge for many of us and fundamental change, we've entered this week into a time celebrated by Christians as the season of creation. And I know it is a time celebrated by Christians because groups do tend to take ownership, but actually the season of creation is for everybody. And as an interfaith, interspiritual minister, that is something that is very close to my heart. So with the season of creation upon us, my thoughts turned to thoughts of hope and renewal. Where do we find our hope? What is the renewal that we are seeking? I feel that this time of the season of creation is an opportunity for the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic to somewhat loosen itself on us, to the grip to be loosened on us. And in the light, of course, of a promised summer, and I'm sitting in Cape Town, thinking, looking out the window, thinking, where is our promised summer? What happened to spring? Right? But we know that it will come because it always does. It's something that we trust in the cycles of the universe. This month, we also have joyful celebrations ahead. We have the International Day of Peace coming up. What more affirmation of hope and renewal can there be than that? Hope and renewal, hope in renewal, hope for renewal. These cycles are as natural to the human psyche as the air that we breathe. But in truth, many of us remain at sea, in the storm. Our lives totally changed and challenged. Solid ground is not visible. We are vulnerable. We are rocking. We are unsteady in a stormy sea. We have spent our lives building resilience, but up until now, we didn't know what the need for it would really look like. And what that resilience would really be when the time came for many of us. Personally, I think about the times of the war when people in the first couple of months were saying, oh, we'll be home by Christmas. This is all going to be over by Christmas. Well, 5 years later, and we're in a time right now where we have no idea. We just don't. So thank you again. Yes, as I am an interfaith, interspiritual minister, and because my interest and my passion is interfaith and the beauty inherent in all paths, I thought of myself as belonging nowhere until I realized that in truth I belong everywhere. So I have neither a congregation nor a career plan, but the path itself is the plan, and the adventure, and my community includes people of all faiths and men. So it's an interesting thing about having a career that doesn't really exist, is that we get to make it up as we go along. And that probably wouldn't suit everybody. It certainly has its challenges. But I think of it very much as a reflection of the times that we're in, and a reflection of how we do what we do in our moments of challenge. I think often about that beautiful line from the 121st Psalm, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And again, this may be helpful to you or I, but what about someone whose perception is more grounded in basic survival issues, and they don't perceive the magnificence, greatness of the creation around us, but are simply embedded in the drama and the pain and the fear of day-to-day survival. So in a world where the only thing to expect is the unexpected, and where the Einsteinian definition of insanity is the prevailing norm, because everybody just wants to keep on doing what they were always doing, how do we find sustainable hope and a wellspring of renewal, reliable resilience, and solid equanimity? I feel like I'm speaking to a group of people who really have that, because your sacred practice is so profound. But what I want to tell you about, and I want to actually have a conversation with you, I want you to be aware of the fact that I can't see the chat right now, and I can't see any hands raised, so I'm going to rely on Linda, whose face I can see, to simply raise a hand and wave at me if anybody has something they'd like to say. I'd like to think of this more as a conversation than anything else. So if you do have something that you'd like to chip in, as I said, you know, the path can go anywhere. I have a map, but it's not the territory. So if you have something that you'd like to contribute or comment on or ask at any point, please do. So my interfaith work introduced me to the Charter for Compassion, and when I expanded my field to include environmental advocacy, which is something that I'm doing a lot now with the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, how interesting it was for me to find the Charter for Compassion handed to me to sign along with my other contractual documentation, which was really interesting, because as the Southern African coordinator for the Charter for Compassion, it was like having myself handed back to me. It was an interesting moment. I wondered if there was a message there. So just to refresh you, I'd like to just read to you the Charter. It's not very long. And I do think of this as sacred writing. The Prince of Compassion lies at the heart of all religions, ethical and spiritual traditions, calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves. Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures, to dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there, to honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being, treating everybody without exception with absolute justice, equity, and respect. It is also necessary in both public and private life to refrain consistently and empathically from inflicting pain, to act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest, to impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody, and to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies, is a denial of our common humanity. We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately, and that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion. We therefore call upon all men and women to return to the ancient principle that any interpretation of scripture that breeds violence, hatred, or disdain is illegitimate, to ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information about other traditions, religions, and cultures, to encourage a positive appreciation of cultural and religious diversity, to cultivate an informed empathy with the suffering of all human beings, even those regarded as enemies. We urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world, rooted in a principled determination to transcend selfishness. Compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological, and religious boundaries. Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential to human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity. It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable to the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community. How interesting that in this world of expectation, exploitation, consumerism, and greed built on theologies of dominion, we have to be taught how to be compassionate. It is intrinsic to the human psyche, compassion, because of its understanding of our interdependence. And yet we seem to be really good at unteaching compassion in our world. So I found myself studying compassionate integrity training. And in fact, I became a compassionate integrity training facilitator very recently. The Charter for Compassion is based primarily on the Abrahamic faiths, compiled by Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scholars who sought the definitive common values in religion. It is designed to appeal to common values in people of all faiths and none. So despite the fact that it comes out of religious thinking and teaching, it is designed for a secular world. Unlike the Golden Rule, which is part of it, but which is a clear exercise in comparative religion and represents the one common teaching that flows through all the religions of the world. So how do we learn compassion? And this is where I'm going to share with you some slides. I'm not going to be sharing with you detail about the steps to learning compassion because that would take 10 weeks. I am going to simply give you a very brief overview, and the texts that I'm going to be quoting along with the slides are my own. I'm fascinated by the fact that in a 10-week course, compassion itself was only introduced in week 8, and that really tells us something about the path to rebuilding that muscle, the compassion muscle in us. So my purpose here is to provide a roadmap to resilience, remembering that the map is not the territory. Resilience in this time of great challenge is my definition of hope and renewal. So here we are. I'm going to share this slideshow with you now. And I have to press share screen in order to do that. There we are. Right, can you see the screen? And put it on slideshow. There we are. Can you see that?
No, I can't.
You can't see that. So my phone is not, my screen is not sharing, is that right?
No, I can see you. Who said they can't?
See.
I can see the slideshow.
You
It
can
must
see
be-
it.
Yes,
You can see
Yes.
the slideshow.
yeah.
Yes.
The little people will all vanish off to the side somewhere and you'll just see Berry's slides now.
Okay.
So calming body and mind is the very first step. And we've done a beautiful job of that this morning, thanks to your beautiful practice. The text that I chose to go with this slide, though, is from the Tao Te Ching, chapter 16. Empty yourself of everything. Let the mind rest at peace. The 10,000 things rise and fall while the self watches their return. They grow and flourish and then return to the source. Returning to the source is stillness, which is the way of nature. The way of nature is unchanging. Knowing constancy is insight. Not knowing constancy leads to disaster. Knowing constancy, the mind is open. With an open mind, you will be open-hearted. Being open-hearted, you act royally. Being royal, you will attain the divine. Being divine, you will be at one with the Tao. Being at one with the Tao is eternal, and though the body dies, the Tao will never pass away.
Berry,
Yes.
could you just briefly give us a short background to the Tao, where that text comes from? I see that some people are confused about that.
Ah, okie dokie. Yeah, Tao Te Ching, gosh. So where to really start with that? So the Tao Te Ching is also known as Lao Tzu, and it's the Chinese classic text traditionally credited to the 16th century sage, Lao Tzu. And the authorship and date of and composition are debated. Yeah, but it's a book of wisdoms. It's actually translated as the classic of the way's virtues. So it's really a book of virtues. I think of it as deep wisdoms, and I think of it as poetry of the soul.
Yes, darling.
Does that help you?
Yes, I think that'll help people just to, I think it was a strange word to hear, as they kind of thought we'd hear Genesis chapter 5 or something, you know, so that was just the confusion. Before I turn back to Berry, can I please just ask everyone to mute themselves? We can hear some background noise.
So the second part, or the second step towards compassion in your life, is around ethical mindfulness. And so it's about this. It's funny to get this particular slide, get lost in nature and you will find yourself, is really what we think of every now and then. But to be honest, it's probably not the most practical thing to do, get lost in nature. And being heedful. So it's about being heedful as well, and knowing that actually danger, there are dangers around us, and not only for ourselves, but for others. And we need to bring mindfulness, our presence, and deep heedfulness into our spatial relations, our spatial relationships, where we are right now. It's about physical distancing. It's about being aware of where we're at in respect to other people, and not putting ourselves in danger, not putting others in danger. So that's ethical mindfulness. It makes me think of Ubuntu. It makes me think of holding ourselves in a state of right relationship with other people and with the world around us, and defining ourselves in that respect. I love this slide because this beautiful knife was given to me by a beloved cousin. Emotional awareness. Most of us are not even aware that we spread ourselves around quite a lot emotionally. We're not aware that what we're feeling is very often just going out there, and people are experiencing, we're affecting people around us. So it's becoming aware of our own emotions through whatever practice is appropriate, through journaling, through the mindful contemplation that you practice, but just being aware of what's going on in your body. We are so disconnected as a collective. We're trained really to be quite disconnected from our bodies and what is feeling, and reconnecting with our emotions and accepting them is a really important part of moving on towards the next step. So the next step is about practicing self-compassion. Why? Because people are like toothpaste tubes. What you put in is going to come out when you squeeze it. So if you have put compassion into yourself and love into yourself, when we are squeezed, that is what is going to be coming out. You cannot expect somebody who's had no compassion shown to them to understand really what compassion is and to be able to express it. And likewise, violence comes from violence. We know that. It's an accepted truth in our psyches. So what is it that we want to be putting out into the world? And life is going to squeeze us. So that is the importance of self-compassion, whatever form it takes for you. And there are so many forms. I'm not actually going to go into a list right now. This is one of my favorites, impartiality and common humanity. So as an interfaith, interspiritual minister, I'm very often asked to speak at schools and tell little children, give them a context for what interfaith is. And very often children in schools represent all sorts of different faiths and belief systems, some of them quite contradictory. But I say to them, what is your favorite flower? And they tell me a rose. Another little girl will say a lily. Another little girl will say a daisy. And a little boy will go, I like the dandelions. And they all have something different. And then I say to them, and which one does God love the best? And then they look at me wide-eyed, because which one does God love the best? But yet they're all planted in the same soil, and they are fed by the same rain, and they are kissed by the same sun, and they are embraced by the same breeze. So which one does God love the best? And that is how I see our different religions and our beliefs, is that we are all here on this one planet, which we have to share, and there is no best. So just moving on to the next slide. Forgiveness and gratitude. Once we accept that the earth belongs to all of us and that there is no best, that we all have our place, we move on to a time of forgiveness and gratitude. For me, one of the most beautiful practices, and I'm just reaching for a book that I wanted to share with you. One of the most beautiful practices in times of death in the Jewish tradition is to say Kaddish. And the Kaddish is the praise and glory of God, not about the soul of the departed. And I love that because it speaks into a celebration of all of life. And for me, forgiveness and gratitude is a release and an unburdening and an unbundling to allow us to continue to celebrate all of life under all circumstances. Last night, I was at a funeral in Ravensmead. Not something I would normally do under COVID conditions, but it was a very dear friend who passed, and I felt that I owed it to his wife and to accept her invitation to come and speak at his memorial service. So it was all about singing and dancing. And this family, who buried a mother 3 weeks ago, who buried a father 1 week ago, and who buried their brother and husband last night, were singing and dancing. You know the Jerusalemmer? They were doing the Jerusalemmer in the street. It was a street party. There was loud music, a loud band. They were just saying, thank you, God, for the lives that you shared with us, for the lives that we have. It was very moving. So, yeah, a lot of forgiveness and gratitude right there. Empathic concern. So empathic concern empathy is really about expressing the skills for compassion. So Brené Brown speaks about empathy as the skill set that enables us to express compassion, that enables us to feel not for somebody, but with somebody. So that I don't take on their burden, but what I do is I walk alongside them. I bear witness. Bearing witness is a deeply powerful practice, but also what we have here is we have clear boundaries. We have absolutely clear boundaries about what is mine to do and what is not mine to do. What is mine, what is okay and what is not okay for me. What I'm prepared to give, what I'm not prepared to give. And once we have those clear boundaries in place, we are free to do what it is that we need to do. So, and to reach out in a way that is meaningful to us. And that, of course, enables us to express compassion in its true form. Compassion is defined as understanding the interdependence of all of us and of all things, and of acting on that interdependence. So ultimately what that is the expression of the golden rule. And the golden rule, of course, is to treat others the way you would like to be treated or the way we would like to be treated. I chose this photograph to express compassion because this wonderful, wonderful friend of mine was that day making soup for helping a group of people, not single-handedly, to make soup for 400 people, simply because we knew that there were people who were hungry and it was a gesture of compassion. And I chose that because I hate to tell you how many carrots she chopped and peeled that day. I hate to tell you how many onions and potatoes were chopped and peeled that day. And it was a glorious act of community, but it was a conscious choice to come together to do that. And that was an act of compassion. And of course, slide number 9, appreciating interdependence. Once we have taken all these steps and we are now moving into the action of compassion, into mindful act of compassion, because we have understood along this way that compassion without boundaries and compassion without discernment is not necessarily helpful. It can become self-serving, and it can also be something that's given with the best of intentions is not always in the best interests of the recipient. So those of us who are parents are very well aware of that. I've made far too many mistakes in that respect. So the interdependence of all things, everything affects everything else. None of us is a silo and no system is a silo. So even though we look, for instance, at the world of NGOs and we look at how they very often work in a silo and feel quite territorial about what they do and what they're giving to a community, without realizing that actually next door is another NGO that is working in the same field, doing similar and with the same intention. And if they were to just join forces, oh my goodness, much better could things be. And this does not apply only to the human family. We look to nature And we realize that in nature, nothing works in a silo, nothing. Everything works together, and that is why the puzzle pieces for me was a beautiful metaphor for how things fit together. And when you take out one piece, it really does leave a gap that is significant and impactful and not necessarily in a good way at all. And just, so just learning to appreciate that. And then moving on to our final slide, which is really about engaging with discernment. I chose this because it made me laugh. It's a cartoon stock image. Bob loved the outdoors, wound up with quite a collection. And what that says to me is just I'm going to stop screen sharing now, if I'm there, so I can come back to all of you and come back to the room, and I hope that you can see me. So what that says to me is engaging with discernment is just, you know, when you turn a key in a lock and sometimes you just have to turn it a little bit for it to engage. And it's tweaking our thinking, just shifting our thinking slightly. Who would have ever thought about making a collection of the outdoors? You know, it's just that thinking slightly differently about something can sometimes bring a very different solution. So when we apply the rules of compassion to some situation, how different does it look? I'm going to give you an example, and that is getting close to where I'm going to be moving into a time of more discussion, I hope. So 2 years ago in KwaZulu-Natal, some of you might remember the news stories about a little mosque in a place called Verulam, which was attacked by a group of people who were apparently ISIS connected, and the imam was killed and a number of people were very badly hurt. Massive trauma for the community. And it was a Shia mosque. It's important because in South Africa, we have mostly Sunni Muslims, very few Shia Muslims, but this happened to be a Shia mosque. So, Sunni and Shia, for those who don't know, are like different denominations of Christianity, if we were to just draw that comparison. So, different denominations of Islam in this respect. So, 12 people were eventually arrested. In fact, rounded up pretty soon. It was quite well done in that respect. And then the court case started, and the court case, as they often are, was deferred, postponed, and then it was postponed again. And on the 28th of February this year, which is now a year and a half after the event, the magistrate said to the prosecuting advocate, he said, I need you to do a number of things, take a number of steps before our next court case on the 13th of July, and this is what I expect to be done. And you need to give proper briefing to the investigating officer, share the information you have. There was a whole lot of steps that needed to be taken. They came back to court on the 13th of July. The prosecutor had not done any of those things, and the magistrate got really angry and threw the court case out. 12 people released. How does that feel to the community? So I accept that COVID-19 had happened and we had gone into lockdown. However, the magistrates court, the personnel, including that particular advocate who was in charge of the who was the prosecution, he had been designated as an essential worker and required to work during that time, albeit from home, as many of us were. So he had done nothing other than make a couple of phone calls, which had not done the job at all. So the case was thrown out. one of our organizations looked at that and said, that's not okay, and immediately wrote a letter to Pretoria, to the prosecuting authorities, saying, please reinstate the case. My Charter for Compassion colleagues and I looked at that and we said, there has to be something else here. How do we apply compassion in a situation like this? I wonder if anybody has any ideas what you might have done. I'm going to invite some comments on that before I tell you what we did. And you'll have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
I would think it would be good to engage with the community again and ask their feelings and how they feel about this, what has happened. Not that it's going to solve anything, but just to let them feel that they've been heard at least.
That's a very, very good point. That's one of the things we didn't do, purely out of geographical inability to be there. Anybody else? Okay, Penny, thank you so much, because you've put something into my mind that I know has to take place, and I believe that the local Cape Town Shia community have been in touch very much with the community, but the broader interfaith community maybe not so much, and that's a failing and something that we can remedy. So I appreciate it.
Sorry. Yeah,
Yes.
sorry. You know, my reason for saying that is I think a lot of our problem in this country is there's so much anger and so much unresolved anger about what's happened in the past and what's happening at the moment. And if people don't have a chance to express that anger constructively, then they turn to violence, you know. And, you know, I drive along past Baden-Powell, you know, on Baden-Powell Road past Khayelitsha, and there's been a lot of problems on the roads, on that road, because of violence and things. And it's unexpressed anger. You know, these people are putting up their shacks, they're knocking them down. They're putting them up, they're knocking them down. And then we get upset when they block the road. You know, they're not heard. And I mean, it's a huge problem. It's not that it can be fixed just by having a chat, but at least if somebody spoke to them and listened to them, they would feel something is happening. You know, even if we are just being heard. And I think that's very important. Everybody wants to be heard, whether you're a 3-year-old in a preschool class or, you know, living on the streets.
Listening is a really powerful skill. It's the superpower, isn't it?
I'm also wondering if anybody spoke to the prosecutor and asked him what was his reason for doing so little in this important case.
Thank you for the question, Cornelia. They did, and he did not have an answer. He could not explain it.
Thank you.
I'd like to just come back to Penny's point briefly, and that is around one of the things that I've realized working on the Cape Flats largely is how the Cape Flats is an area that was born out of violence, out of forced removals. So how were we expecting anything else to come out of that other than violence? And that's a huge question for us to grapple with. And I think the ability to tell stories can be so transformative. So I totally agree with you. You speak my language when you say people need to tell their stories and be heard. The space and the platform to tell stories is so powerful. And that's been one of the real joys of Zoom, is that technology is a great equalizer. So when we meet on Zoom, and that's why supplying activity, supplying data to people is so crucial, because when we meet on Zoom, we meet on a very equal footing. as long as we have that access to data. So that's one of the most empowering things we can do right now in our country, is actually give that access to data, because the other thing it does is it presents options to people. And if people are able to look at options and to access options of information and how to think and how things can be different, that can make an enormous difference. But I've really been enjoying on Zoom the ability to smooth the playing fields and really just engage with people beyond the geographic boundaries that still beset us. So what we did was we actually wrote to the prosecutor in the National Prosecuting Authority in Pretoria, and we said we support the call from the organization who asked for the case to be reinstated. But more than that, we understand that there's a deep issue here, a deep human issue within the team at the Magistrates Court in Verulam. And that deep issue is, I can't remember the words that we used exactly, but it really went around the poverty of the human soul that is not able to connect the laws of fairness with the laws of justice, with the legal laws, because legalities and fairness are two different things. And we can actually do something to help here, and that is we can offer you this thing called compassionate integrity training, and we totally would encourage you to take us up and allow us to work with your team, and so that it would change their entire attitude towards their work and to their responsibility that they carry and to the impact that they have in the communities and in the world around them. And that is maybe a gift that they could take into all the other cases that arise in the future. In this world in which is so built on commercialism, I suppose it's to be expected that we haven't had a response to our letter at all, but we will be taking it further. And it might seem like something that is not really done, but we can change that. And if we don't, because what we've learned is that we have to change things. And we all have something that we can bring to the table. But if nobody says this I can bring to the table, then how do we know? So let's put the options out there. Let's take our offerings to the table, and let's be strong in that and stand firm in that, because one of the issues with our beautiful sacred practices is that very often we're seen as being pacifist. We're seen as being kind and gentle and sweet, and we can be walked on. And we're seen as not having the strength and the backbone to stand up to politics and big business and consumerism and exploitation. And so many of our clerics, many of our people have turned to war. I was in a conversation during this week with somebody who, in a regional interfaith dialogue, and somebody says, but we have to fight this. And how do you align the language of war with the heart of a lover? So we need to find a way to be powerful and strong in our beliefs, but also holding our peace and standing up for our peace. And that's the power of resilience. And that's the power of that inner core, that inner strength that comes from us, because it can't come from anywhere else. So when the Bible says, I lift my eyes to the hills from whence comes my help, that's why it's so important to understand that that's part of me. The breathing in is the calling God into me. The breathing out is the reaching out towards God. I'm going to end with a poem by John O'Donoghue, who is one of my favorite poets at the moment. And I think that in his writing, he expresses a beautiful awareness of interdependence that brings with it both wisdom and discernment about how to work with that powerfully, like an eagle rising with two wings. It's called Beernacht. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the gray window and the ghost of loss gets into you, may a flock of colors, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays in the currach of thought and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. The fluency of the ocean be yours, and may the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. I thank you for hearing me. I feel like I've heard my voice far too much, and I really would like to open the floor to discussion. You are all wonderful listeners, but I'd love to hear some of your voices as well.
Sorry,
I
me
have
again?
a question, if I may.
Okay, we need to do one.
Yeah.
How do we do this? Sorry, I don't know who. You know what you can do? If you scroll down your screen, there's a little smiley face, and underneath that smiley face, it says reactions. And if you click that, you'll see you have the opportunity to put a hand up like that. Like you can see on my face, I've just put a hand up on my face.
Oh, cool,
And
okay.
Barbara Harris, I see you.
Okay.
Please would you speak?
Right. Thank you very much, Berry. I have been thinking a lot about compassion in the last week or two, and also had some discussion in our little group yesterday. So what you said around that really resonates with me. I want to ask you if you can say a bit more around gestures of compassion. You showed that full image of the friend helping to make soup. And I think participating in gestures of compassion is one way of actually practicing that or exercising that compassion muscle in us. I think that's the term that you used. But I think the flip side is that participating in an action like it can be a gesture that feeds 400 people for one day and gives me the feeling that I've now done my bit, and I can withdraw again into my own little space and bother about me. So you could just say something about that, those two possible sides to that. Thank you.
Yes, Barbara, thank you so much for that question. That is an excellent question. So I think when one practices gestures of compassion and one participates in things like that, it becomes a way of life and a way of thinking. And when your way of thinking is that intrinsic, it's like the butterfly wing that has an impact on the other side of the world. It changes the vibration, it changes your impact on the world around you. So you will bring that kind of thinking, compassionate thinking, into every situation in your life. Other gestures of compassion, and you know, many of us want to participate. We want to make a difference. So one of the big things at the moment is planting food gardens. Food security is an enormous issue in our country. I'm part of, because of my work with SAFC, I have become part of a number of food growing in the South Peninsula. And these are people who've just planted something in their home and are sharing. I met an amazing woman the other day who has an earthworm farm. She inspired me and excited me so much. She has an earthworm farm, and she gave me a huge container of beautiful, rich, loamy soil filled with earthworms, which I was able to take to somebody else who's just planted a garden, a food garden, at a shelter for teenage girls. On Mandela Day, we were given, Cape Town Interfaith Initiative was given the gift of 1,670 Rand to do something with. And we thought about, where can this money make the most impact? You're quite right. A soup kitchen feeds people for a day. What is the greatest impact? And we looked at that particular food garden that my friend Khalema had created at St. Michael's Children's Home, or St. Michael's Shelter, I think it's called now. And we said, that's where we can make a really good impact, because that's something that's going to keep on giving. And we did that. And then we heard about a group of women who were unemployed and who got together to make masks, but not just to sell. They're making masks specifically for maternity units in hospitals, because so many women who are unemployed or indigent or just in a very, very bad poverty situation are arriving to have their babies, because guess what? The babies aren't waiting for COVID to go away, but they're arriving at hospital to have their babies and they don't have masks. So these women are making masks for these hospitals to give to women who arrive there who just don't have. So we thought, wow, that's an amazing, how do we support them? So we supported them by saying, you know what, we were given this clump of money that we were asked to do something with, but we're going to pay it forward. We're going to match that amount of money, and we're going to give it to the mask making team to just, it's a lot of money if you don't have it. So, you know, for an organization, it's not an enormous amount of money, but for those people, it is the difference between being able to do something impact in their community and not. So those are gestures of compassion that we witnessed other people doing and that we chose to support. But I think the most powerful gesture of compassion is to really change your thinking, to hold good thoughts, because that is really how we impact not only our lives, but the lives around us. So when we hold good thoughts and we're able to practice kindness wherever we find the need. Barbara, I don't know if that helps, if that goes any way towards what you were asking.
Thank you, Behr. Yeah, other people might also have ideas around that.
Indeed.
Thank you for those examples also. Thank you.
I'm sure there were other voices. So any other hands or... see, Penny, you have your hand up again. I love those little hands.
Sorry, me again. I was just thinking as we were talking, and you know, after what I said is, you know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission all those years ago was incredibly powerful. I mean, isn't that what this country needs again? You know, there's another one of those, or a similar thing like your interfaith, just where people can speak and share and be heard. You know, I don't know how one would go around organizing it, but, you know, we've had a mini version in our church just where they've had courageous conversations around racism. And it's not, look, personally, I haven't actually attended any of them because I haven't been able to, but apparently it's been really, really powerful, you know, and that's just within our little church community, which in our church is very multiracial and, you know, different levels of affluence and, you know. And also, so one more question possibly for Linda, is this being recorded? I mean, can we get a copy of this later? Because I would love to share it with my church, yeah, or some of my centering prayer friends, actually.
I have recorded Berry's section, so I think it'll just take me a while to get it and be able to share it, but I definitely will.
Penny, thank you for that comment. May I ask where you are geographically?
I'm in Sun Valley for Shook, but I work in Somerset West, so I do the Great Trek every day.
Wow, that's quite a distance. So
Yeah.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an email address in the chat. And I really would invite you to connect with me, because Cape Town Interfaith really likes to put together events where people are able to share from so many different perspectives. We had our open hearts, open minds, and of course we haven't been able to meet face to face for some time, but we're getting our act together on Zoom, and we are getting quite creative in our planning, if I can put it that way. And I think that there are some quite exciting things coming up that you might well enjoy. Linda, I'm very happy to share our plans with you at some stage as they come up. We haven't finalized any dates yet, but we definitely have some plans in mind.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Dee, I can hear you. Thank you.
Earlier, when you were talking about the lawsuit and so on case, you offered a course. What was the course that they turned down? What was it?
It's compassionate. Sorry, I spoke over you. That was poor. Would you mind repeating that?
I just said, how do you define it?
Oh,
how do you define the course? Yeah.
So it's compassionate integrity training. And the overview is what I showed you in the slides. And obviously it's a lot deeper than that, because it's a 10-week course that 2 hours a week for 10 weeks, which includes some personal reflection, some deep practice, and it really is a process. So I've gone through it twice now, because first when I learned compassionate integrity training, and then when I did it again to become a facilitator. So I really do understand the power and the impact of it. And one of my colleagues is actually a trained lawyer, and she's done the same training as I have. She's also a facilitator. We were in the same class, and she's on the board of Cape Town Interfaith Initiative. So she and I put our heads together and we said, well, we have the skill. Why are we not offering it? And as a lawyer, she's very deeply concerned about the fact that the legal system isn't always a fair system. So, and she said, her words to me were, at university, I was taught about the legal system of justice, but I was never taught how to apply fairness.
So this course, do you offer it online to people, or?
Yes, we can.
So it would just, someone would contact you and ask for it, and if you're able, you do it.
Definitely. We can always make a plan. We would always work out what would be the most convenient times for the group.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Christopher, I see your hand. You need to unmute yourself.
There we go. I was reading in the newspaper yesterday, I think, of a case in Marisburg, and your speaking earlier reminded me of that, where 2 children in a creche went home and said that the pastor who owns the creche had abused them. And this has naturally caused tremendous trauma in the family and in the community. The prosecuting authorities, unlike the ones in your story, have been out to Marisburg. They've spoken with everyone concerned. They've assessed the situation, and they have decided that a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, I think it was, or 3 and 4, are incapable of giving evidence in court. And they've said, for the sake of the children, the complainants, we feel the best is to say that we cannot prosecute this case. Now, the family are feeling so hard done by and are going through great trauma about this. And what struck me was that even were it to be prosecuted, even were the pastor to be found guilty and put in prison, that would not bring closure. And my question is, what are we doing to enable people in their trauma to come to terms with what has happened and what cannot be undone, so that they may have some degree of peace within themselves? That's my question.
It's a huge question. Did you really expect me to have an answer to it? It's that in itself just expresses one of the travesties and tragedies of our lives. And you know, there are so many situations where people are battling with deep, deep trauma that is not rectifiable. You can't change what has happened.
Yeah.
And it's, my mom always used to say to me, it's not what happens to you in life, but what you do with it, which might sound very flip. It is not intended to be light-hearted at all. But truly, I think things like the compassionate integrity training, and there are definitely other resilience trainings around. I'm certainly not saying it's the only one. If we could empower people from an early age to really understand their strength and to give them skills for dealing with trauma, such as, I think it was the Dalai Lama said that if we teach all the 8-year-olds in the world to meditate, we would have peace within 1 generation. It's taking our children and saying to them, well, what is it that they really need to learn that will empower them and give them the strength and the resilience and that sense of hope for the future that will enable them to make the most of life without fear and without wallowing in the terrible, terrible things, without being stuck. Wallowing is the wrong word. Without getting stuck in the terrible, terrible things that happen. And I don't know an adult, quite frankly, who has not been through major trauma in their lives to get there. I've never met anyone who hasn't been through trauma. I think that some of our best role models that we have, if you read any book, it's any biography, people have grappled and struggled and worked at overcoming in order to reach the top of the mountain. And I think that that unfortunately might just be part of the human condition. Not that it makes doing bad things right in any way, shape, or form. We all have to take responsibility. However, let's take responsibility for ourselves first, but also the younger ones, and give people the skills to deal. I think that's a good starting place. It's not the whole story. I don't know if that, I hope that that goes some way, Christopher, towards answering your question.
Thank you. I didn't expect you to have a solution to the problems of the universe. It just is something I thought we could all think about carefully and wonder how we can pass on some of the gifts we've received through contemplation to others.
Definitely. Thank you. Anthony, I see your hand.
Apropos what Christopher has been asking about, you know, in Johannesburg, where I was years ago, about 1996, 7, 8, there were these bank raids and attacks on cash-carrying vehicles and traumatic experiences for everybody. And one of the bank senior counselors came to give us a talk at the church in Johannesburg. And she gave us a talk on how to handle trauma. And I just briefly, it was all about getting those people who'd been forced to lie on the floor in the bank with a submachine gun over them and so on. And very, very serious trauma. And these people were counseled individually and so on. And she said the key issue here was to get, say in the case of Christopher's case with the young children, you would perhaps talk to the parents, but to get the people to recount and go back and have it at the time of trauma or close by, because it's very important not to leave this and it gets internalized and so on. And this was very, very effective. If somebody you know has had a traumatic death in the family, the sky's the limit. And we all know people who, I know somebody very recently whose close, dear relative has just heard that the cancer is spreading into the liver and the blood. And she's extremely fit and perfectly healthy woman. Just hit her like a ton of bricks. And the family, you know, and even right out here in South Africa, their trauma travels. And so that I just thought I'd like to give a little contribution here, something I read from Meister Eckhart, who is a pretty well-known mystic, especially these days. And he was talking on the text of Jesus had said, love your neighbor as yourself. The whole essence of Jesus' wisdom teaching. And so the real question he posed was, how do you know that you love yourself? I found it quite a difficult question to tackle. And he gave a sort of rule of thumb there where if you say you love your friends, and particularly good friends and all your Meta-Mensa, the people in your university class or wherever you find yourself, but there's some that you love them more than others. Okay, you've got your tennis team, or whoever it may be, you love them more than others. And as far as Eckhart was concerned, that was a good test that you do not love yourself. So it's not too easy to get your mind around him, but loving your neighbor is, as you love yourself, is a very big task, but get to know how much God loves us and getting to love ourselves perhaps a little more easily and enable us to love everyone, because that's the basic requirement. But it's a very deep issue, of course. But what we've been talking about now, it just struck me, you know, our country particularly is in quite dire straits, many fronts. So people are traumatized by the economy, they're traumatized by what this party is doing and what that party is doing, the social conditions we live in, and the terrible starving people that you meet at every traffic light, you know. So it in itself is a bit traumatic, but you can only do what is within your province. But I must say the trauma issue is a very, very big one in my experience. And it comes in shapes and forms. Thank you, sorry.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, that was a very relevant quote. Thank you so much. So we started off talking about hope and renewal, and I do hope that you have received some kind of insights today, and that will enrich you going forward, especially during the season of creation. And I'm looking at all of you with your blankets on you, and I'm sitting here with a big heater on, but my feet are freezing, I must be honest. But I know it's just such a wonderful thing to know that summer is coming again. I have to be honest. The sun is my soulmate, and I am really looking forward to the arrival of the real sun again. But through all of it, we walk mindfully, we walk carefully, and we walk understanding that every footprint, every step we take has an impact. And we get to choose that. We get to choose what we carry with us. If we choose to carry the hope and the knowledge of renewal with us, or if we choose to carry the pain and the sadness with us. That's where we're all at. I'm going to leave it right there and hand back to Linda, and thank you so much for this wonderful time with you all.